The morning sun cast long shadows across the auction yard as dust danced in golden beams of light. It was just another Tuesday for most folks in Riverside County. But for Howard Jenkins, a weathered farmer with calloused hands and fading dreams, it would become the day that changed everything. Next up, lot number 47. The auctioneer's voice crackled through ancient speakers. Most bidders had already wandered off, their trailers full of bark and livestock. Howard hadn't planned on bidding at all. His small farm was barely staying afloat, and another mouth to feed was the last thing he needed. Yet something kept him rooted to that spot as a magnificent chestnut thoroughbred with a white blaze was led into the ring. The horse moved with a strange mixture of pride and defeat. His coat, though dull from neglect, couldn't hide the powerful muscles beneath. But it was those eyes, intelligent, defiant, yet somehow wounded, that caught Howard's attention. This wasn't just any horse. This was Thunderclap, once the crown jewel of billionaire industrialist Robert Wellington's racing empire. "What's a horse like that doing here?" whispered a voice behind Howard. Heard Wellington dumped his entire racing division after his divorce. Called it deadweight. Can you believe that? The starting bid was insultingly low. Howard's hand rose before his brain could object. He had exactly $1,200 in his checking account, money earmarked for next season's seed. 20 minutes later, he was leading Thunderclap to his rust-speckled truck and wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. "You've lost your mind, Howard," his wife Elise said that evening, staring at the magnificent animal now occupying their only decent stable. "We can barely feed ourselves, and you bring home a thoroughbred that probably eats better than we do." She wasn't wrong. The mortgage was 3 months behind, and the bank had already sent the first foreclosure notice. Their 20 acres had been in Howard's family for generations, but this might be the year they finally lost it all. What Howard couldn't explain, not even to himself, was the connection he felt the moment he looked into that horse's eyes. Beneath the thoroughbred's pedigree and racing history was a fighter who understood what it meant to be discarded, to be deemed worthless by people who once celebrated your value. The first weeks were harder than Howard imagined. Thunderclap was stubborn, temperamental, and clearly unaccustomed to the humble surroundings of a family farm. The locals laughed when they heard Howard Jenkins had bought Wellington's Castoff. That billionaire couldn't make that horse a winner with million-dollar trainers, they'd say. What chance does a simple farmer have? But late one evening, as rain pounded the barn roof and lightning illuminated the countryside, Howard witnessed something that silenced all doubts. Thunderclap, spooked by thunder, broke free from his stall. Instead of bolting, the thoroughbred ran circles around the paddock with such speed and precision that Howard stood transfixed. The horse wasn't running from something. He was running towards something. That's when Howard spotted the envelope tucked in Thunderclap's medical records. Inside was a report so shocking, it made his hands tremble in the dim light of the barn. If what he was reading was true, the billionaire's Castoff wasn't just another failed racehorse. Thunderclap had a secret, one powerful enough to change both their fates forever. Howard's hands trembled as he read the document again, rain drumming steadily on the barn roof above. The medical report, stamped with Wellington Industries logo, told a story very different from the one circulating around town. Thunderclap hadn't been discarded because he was worthless. According to these records, the thoroughbred had tested positive for a rare genetic marker, one that appeared in only the most elite racing bloodlines. "Potential exceeds all projected metrics," the report read. "Recommend specialized training regimen immediately." Howard frowned, puzzled by the disconnect. If Wellington knew the horse's potential, why auction him off for pennies? The date on the report caught his eye. Just 3 days before the billionaire's racing division was liquidated. Something didn't add up. The next morning, Howard called the only person he knew who might make sense of this. Maggie Donovan had been the county's most respected veterinarian before retirement, and she owed Howard a favor after he'd helped rebuild her barn following last year's floods. "You've got yourself quite the mystery here," Maggie said, examining Thunderclap with practiced hands. Her weathered face crinkled with concentration. "This horse isn't just any thoroughbred. Based on his bone structure and muscle composition, he's got Derby potential written all over him." "Then why would Wellington let him go?" Howard asked, leaning against the stable door. Maggie's expression darkened. "That's the question, isn't it? Robert Wellington didn't build a fortune by making careless mistakes." That evening, as Howard brushed down Thunderclap's coat until it gleamed in the setting sun, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled into his driveway. A tall woman in an impeccable suit stepped out, her heels sinking slightly into the soft earth of the farmyard. "Mr. Jenkins, my name is Diana Frost. I represent Mr. Wellington's interests." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "There appears to have been a misunderstanding at the auction. We'd like to buy back the horse. I'm prepared to offer 10 times what you paid. Cash today." Howard felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. Not interested. The woman's smile tightened. "Mr. Jenkins, I don't think you understand. This is a very generous offer for an animal that frankly requires resources you cannot provide. Seems to me if the horse was so important, Mr. Wellington wouldn't have put him up for auction in the first place," Howard replied, moving protectively toward Thunderclap. Diana Frost's composure slipped just for a moment. "The auction was an oversight. I'm authorized to go to $20,000, but that's final." As tempting as the money was, enough to save the farm and then some, Howard couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. "But," I said, not interested. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got chores to finish." After the SUV disappeared down the dusty road, Howard made 2 calls. The first was to his old friend Jake, who worked security at Wellington Industries. The second was to his nephew, a computer whiz who had gotten into trouble once for hacking, but had since turned his skills toward more legitimate pursuits. That night, as Howard tossed and turned beside his sleeping wife, his phone buzzed with a text message. The information his nephew had uncovered about Thunderclap's bloodline made his blood run cold. If true, it explained everything: the hasty auction, the generous buyback offer, and why a billionaire might be desperate to reacquire a horse he had so publicly discarded. What it didn't explain was why someone had tampered with the stable lock, or why Howard's security camera had captured a shadowy figure circling the barn just minutes ago. Howard grabbed his shotgun from above the fireplace and hurried toward the barn, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The night air carried the scent of coming rain as his boots crunched on the gravel path. He'd lived his whole life on this land, knew every shadow and sound, and something was definitely wrong. He approached the barn cautiously, noticing the padlock still secure, but with fresh scratch marks around the keyhole. Inside, Thunderclap was agitated, moving restlessly in his stall. Howard did a quick sweep of the premises, but found no one. Whoever had been lurking had fled, but they'd left something behind: a small dart half buried in the hay by Thunderclap's stall. They were going to tranquilize him, Maggie confirmed the next morning, examining the dart. "Standard procedure for transporting difficult horses. Howard, this isn't just about money anymore. Someone's willing to commit a crime to get this horse back." "But why?" Ellie asked, pouring coffee with hands that trembled slightly. The financial strain of the farm had kept her up many nights, but this new threat brought a different kind of worry. "It's just a horse." Howard's nephew will arrive later that day, his laptop under his arm and dark circles under his eyes. "You're not going to believe what I found," he said, spreading papers across the kitchen table. "Thunderclap isn't just any thoroughbred. His bloodline traces directly to Northern Dancer and Secretariat, but that's just the beginning. We'll pull up a database of racing statistics. See this? Wellington's racing division was on the verge of a breakthrough breeding program. They were creating the perfect racehorse: speed, stamina, temperament. According to their own projections, a horse with Thunderclap's genetic markers could shatter every record in the book." "Then why get rid of him?" Howard asked. "That's where it gets interesting," Will replied. 2 weeks before the auction, Wellington's chief geneticist died in a car accident. All her research disappeared the same day. The next morning brought another visitor, Janet Reed, a reporter from the Racing Chronicle, who'd caught wind of the unusual interest in an apparently ordinary auction horse. Her arrival coincided with a call from Howard's friend Jake at Wellington Industries. "Listen carefully," Jake whispered, his voice barely audible. "I can't talk long. Wellington didn't authorize selling that horse. The auction happened while he was overseas. Someone inside the company wanted Thunderclap gone, and when Wellington found out, heads rolled. Now he's desperate to get the horse back before anyone realizes what happened." "Before they realize what?" Howard pressed. "Wellington's ex-wife Diana didn't just get half his fortune in the divorce. She got his research division, including all patents and breeding rights. The geneticist who died, she was about to testify that Thunderclap's breeding program belonged to Diana, not Robert. If that horse wins a major race under new ownership, the truth comes out, and Wellington loses billions in potential breeding fees." The pieces were falling into place, but they revealed a picture more dangerous than Howard had imagined. This wasn't just about a horse anymore. It was about corporate espionage, inheritance battles, and a fortune in breeding rights. Janet's investigation revealed another layer to the story. Wellington's racing manager, Jeffrey Pierce, disappeared right after the auction. His access card was used to authorize the sale, but security footage shows someone else using it. The police are treating it as a missing persons case. That evening, as storm clouds gathered on the horizon, Howard made a decision. If Thunderclap was truly special, there was only one way to prove it. They needed to race him. Not just any race, but the upcoming Founders Cup, a regional qualifying event for bigger stakes races. It was a long shot, but if Thunderclap performed as the research suggested he could, the world would take notice. The preparation was grueling. Howard hadn't trained a racehorse in decades, not since his brief stint as a stable hand in his youth. But something remarkable was happening as they worked. Thunderclap was responding, improving daily in ways that defied explanation. The horse that had been dismissed as a billionaire's Castoff was revealing his true potential. Word spread quickly in the small community. Some came to help, offering expertise or simply an extra pair of hands. Others came to mock, certain that the struggling farmer was delusional. Local trainer Pete Dunham was among the skeptics. "You're in over your head, Jenkins," he said, leaning against the paddock fence. "Even if that horse has potential, you can't unleash it. Racing is for professionals with deep pockets, not desperate farmers trying to save their land." What Pete didn't mention was his own connection to Wellington Industries, or the envelope of cash he'd received to ensure Thunderclap never made it to the starting gate. As the date of the Founders' Cup approached, the threats escalated. Howard's tires were slashed. Anonymous calls warned him to sell the horse before something happens. But the most disturbing development came when Ellie discovered a manila envelope in their mailbox containing photographs of their daughter at college 3 states away. The message was clear. This wasn't just about a horse anymore. That night, as Howard sat alone in the barn keeping watch, Thunderclap suddenly perked up his ears. Outside, gravel crunched under tires as headlights swept across the barnyard. Not one vehicle, but several. Howard reached for his phone to call for help, but the signal was dead. Through the barn window, he could make out armed figures moving toward the house where Ellie was sleeping, while others approached the barn. They'd run out of time. Howard's heart pounded as he assessed his limited options. The barn had only 2 exits, the main doors now blocked by approaching figures, and the small rear door that led to the paddock. He moved swiftly, whispering calming words to Thunderclap as he slipped a halter over the horse's head. Years of 4M chores meant Howard could navigate the dark barn blindfolded. Outside, radio static crackled as the intruders coordinated their approach. Remember, Wellington wants the horse unharmed. The others are expendable. Howard led Thunderclap through the shadows toward the rear door, praying the old hinges wouldn't betray them. The thoroughbred seemed to sense the danger, moving with unusual silence. Just as they reached the door, Howard's phone vibrated in his pocket. A text from Ellie, "Men outside. Hiding in cellar. Called sheriff." Relief that Ellie was safe quickly gave way to renewed urgency. The sheriff's station was 20 minutes away. Far too long to wait. As the barn's main doors creaked open, Howard made a split-second decision. He flung open the rear door, mounted Thunderclap bareback, and urged the horse into the darkness. They rode without saddle or bridle, Howard's fingers twisted in Thunderclap's mane, the powerful animal responding to the slightest shift of weight. Behind them, shouts erupted as their escape was discovered. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, and the rumble of ATVs shattered the night's quiet. "Head for Miller's Ravine," Howard whispered, guiding Thunderclap toward the densely wooded area that separated his property from the neighboring lands. It was dangerous terrain, steep slopes and hidden drops that had claimed the lives of unwary hikers, but Howard knew every treacherous inch from childhood explorations. What happened next would later become part of local legend. Thunderclap navigated the ravine's hazardous paths with uncanny precision, leaping over fallen logs and skirting drop-offs that would have spelled doom for any other horse. It was as if the thoroughbred could see in the dark, his hooves finding purchase where none seemed possible. The pursuers weren't so fortunate. The sounds of cursing and mechanical failures echoed through the trees as ATVs bogged down in mud or failed to navigate the tight turns. By dawn, Howard and Thunderclap had reached the old hunting cabin that belonged to his late father, miles from any road and accessible only by those who knew the land intimately. Back at the farm, Ellie emerged from hiding to find the sheriff's deputies securing the scene and detaining 2 men who hadn't fled fast enough. Neither would talk, but the unmarked weapons and professional tactical gear told a story of their own. This wasn't just some local intimidation. These were trained operatives. "Mrs. Jenkins," the tall deputy approached with something in his hand. "We found this in one of their vehicles. Thought you should see it." It was a folder containing detailed surveillance photos of their farm, notes on Howard's routine, and something that made Eli's blood run cold: a contract with a security firm authorized by Wellington Industries, with a final page detailing extraction protocols for both the horse and any problematic witnesses. Meanwhile, the story had exploded across local media. Janet Reed's initial article, "Billionaire's Discarded Horse at Center of Mystery," had been picked up by national outlets. The headlines multiplied: "Midnight Raid on Family Farm Linked to Racing Magnate," "Wellington Industries Denies Involvement in Armed Trespass," "Missing Geneticist Case Reopened as Racing Scandal Grows." At the hunting cabin, Howard used a solar-powered radio to get news updates while carefully rationing the limited supplies. Thunderclaps seemed to thrive in the mountain air, growing stronger each day as they ventured out for brief, cautious exercise sessions in hidden meadows. On the third day, a familiar voice called Howard's name from the trees. Maggie Donovan emerged from the forest path, looking exhausted but determined. "Took me all day to find you," she said, dropping her backpack on the cabin's porch. "Your wife sent me. You need to know what's happening." The news was both better and worse than Howard expected. The raid had backfired spectacularly on Wellington, triggering investigations into his business practices. Diana Wellington had publicly challenged her ex-husband, revealing her suspicions about the breeding program and calling for racing authorities to examine the records. Jeffrey Pierce, the missing racing manager, had suddenly reappeared, claiming he'd been held against his will and was prepared to testify. "But here's a real bombshell," Maggie said, pulling a thumb drive from her pocket. "Your nephew Will and Janet Reed found this hidden in the geneticist's research backup. It's not just about Thunderclap's potential. It's about what Wellington was doing to his horses." The files revealed a breeding program that pushed ethical boundaries, with evidence suggesting Wellington had been experimenting with genetic modifications, practices strictly forbidden in thoroughbred racing. If proven, it would mean lifetime bans, criminal charges, and the collapse of his racing empire. "The Founders' Cup is in 3 days," Maggie continued. "Everyone's watching now. If Thunderclap races, if he shows what he can do, Wellington is finished." "And if he doesn't?" Howard asked. "Then Wellington controls the narrative. They'll claim this was all about a stolen horse, industrial espionage, or whatever story his PR team crafts. The evidence is compelling but not conclusive without Thunderclap." That night, as Maggie slept in the cabin, Howard sat outside beneath a canopy of stars, weighing impossible choices. Racing Thunderclap meant exposing the truth but also risking everything: the safety of his family, the future of his farm, perhaps even his life. The safest option was to disappear, to sell the farm and start over somewhere Wellington couldn't reach them. Dawn broke with Howard's decision made. They would race, not just for justice or vindication, but because Thunderclap deserved his moment, the chance to show the world what Wellington had tried to hide. The journey back was tense but uneventful, using back roads and moving only during daylight. They arrived at the farm to find it transformed: media vans parked along the road, racing officials inspecting the property, and a security detail hired by Diana Wellington herself. "I've requested protection for your family," Diana explained when Howard finally met her in person. She was nothing like he'd imagined: warm, straight-talking, with the weathered hands of someone who'd grown up around horses before marrying into wealth. "Robert's desperate now. The Racing Commission is reviewing his entire operation based on the evidence your reporter friend uncovered." The day before the Founders' Cup, final preparations were underway. Thunderclap had been officially entered, his paperwork scrutinized and approved. Against all protocols, Howard would ride him, a concession the racing officials had granted given the extraordinary circumstances and intense public interest. That evening, as Howard finished Thunderclap's final training session, a black sedan pulled up to the farm's gate. Robert Wellington himself stepped out, alone and unarmed. The security team moved to intercept him, but Howard waved them off. The two men faced each other across the paddock fence, the billionaire industrialist in his tailored suit and the farmer in mud-spattered work clothes. For a long moment, Mather spoke. "You don't know what you're involved in, Jenkins," Wellington finally said, his voice quiet but intense. "This isn't about one horse. This is about the future of racing itself." "Seems like that's for tomorrow to decide," Howard replied evenly. Wellington's composed facade cracked. "I can still destroy you, your farm, your family, everything. Walk away now. $1 million, offshore account, new identities. Last chance." Howard studied the man before him, powerful, wealthy, accustomed to bending the world to his will. Yet beneath the polished exterior, Howard saw something unexpectedly human: fear. "What are you really afraid of, Mr. Wellington?" Howard asked. "That he'll lose, or that he'll win?" Wellington's answer was cut short by the sound of approaching vehicles. Reporters had spotted the billionaire's distinctive car. Within seconds, cameras would be rolling. "This isn't over," Wellington hissed before retreating to his sit-in. As night fell over the farm, an uneasy calm settled. Security patrols circled the property. Inside the house, Howard's family gathered around the kitchen table, reviewing final preparations for tomorrow. Outside in his stall, Thunderclap rested, unaware of the stakes riding on his performance. In the darkness beyond the security perimeter, a lone figure watched the farm through night vision binoculars. They spoke quietly into a satellite phone. "Everyone's focused on Wellington. Nobody's watching us. We move at 3 a.m. The true threat had never been Robert Wellington at all. The figure moving through the shadows wasn't alone. As they approached the barn's perimeter, a flashlight beam suddenly caught them in its glare. "That's far enough, Pierce," called out a familiar voice. Jeffrey Pierce, Wellington's former racing manager, froze. Howard stepped forward from behind the barn door, shotgun in hand. Beside him stood Sheriff Dale and 2 deputies. "You were Wellington's man all along," Howard said. "But he never ordered you to sell Thunderclap, did he? You arranged that auction yourself." Pierce's laugh was hollow. "Wellington was going to ruin thoroughbred racing with his genetic experiments. That horse is living proof of what he's done. I try to hide the evidence, bury it where no one would look, at a small county auction, until a simple farmer recognized what he was looking at," Sheriff Dale added. By dawn, Pierce was in custody, and with him the final piece of the puzzle. The morning of the Founders' Cup arrived with perfect racing weather, clear skies, and a light breeze. The stands overflowed with spectators drawn by the national coverage. In the paddock, Howard adjusted Thunderclap's racing silks, not the elaborate designs of wealthy stables, but a simple pattern based on his family's farm colors. Diana Wellington approached, extending her hand. "Whatever happens today, you've already won," she said. "The Racing Commission has opened a formal investigation into Robert's entire operation. His board of directors has called an emergency meeting." As Howard guided Thunderclap to the starting gate, the announcer's voice boomed. "In an unprecedented turn of events, a horse purchased at county auction for $1,200 will compete against the elite thoroughbreds of the racing world. Can David truly challenge Goliath on this historic day?" The starting bell rang and everything faded away. The crowd, the controversy, the danger, all of it disappeared in the thundering of hooves. Howard felt Thunderclap's power beneath him, a force of nature responding to the lightest touch. They weren't just running a race, they were riding a legend. When they crossed the finish line, the roar from the crowd told the story before the official results. Thunderclap hadn't just won. He'd shattered the track record by nearly 2 seconds, a margin so wide it seemed impossible. In the winner's circle, surrounded by cameras and microphones, Howard kept his words simple. "This horse didn't just save my farm. He reminded me what it means to believe in something when the whole world tells you you're wrong." 6 months later, Riverside Farm had transformed. The mortgage was paid off, the buildings renovated, and a modest training facility constructed where Howard worked with a small stable of promising thoroughbreds. Wellington Racing had collapsed amid investigations and indictments, while Diana's new ethical breeding program, with Thunderclap as its cornerstone, was revolutionizing the industry. The legend only grew when genetic testing confirmed what many had suspected. Thunderclap carried natural genetic variations that mimicked what Wellington had been trying to artificially create. He wasn't the product of forbidden experimentation, but a 1-in-a-million natural phenomenon that Wellington had recognized and then tried to replicate through questionable means. On a crisp autumn evening, Howard sat on his porch watching Thunderclap graze in the paddock. Janet Reed, now working on a book about the scandal, joined him with a cup of coffee. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Getting caught up in all this? There were moments you could have walked away." Howard watched the magnificent horse that had changed everything. "Some things find you," he said finally. "Not because you're special, but because you're willing to see their value when nobody else will." As the sun set over Riverside Farm, Thunderclap raised his head, his silhouette majestic against the fading light. The billionaire's Castoff had found his true home, and a simple farmer had become a legend, not through wealth or power, but through the courage to believe in second chances.